Welcome to Witch Ways, Folklore and Fairy Tales. I am your host Elise, and this is the story of Vasilisa the Beautiful and the witch Baba Yaga. In a certain kingdom there lived a merchant. Although he had been married for 12 years, he had only one daughter, called Vasilisa the Beautiful. When the girl was 8 years old, her mother died. On her deathbed, the merchant's wife called her daughter, took a doll from under her blanket and gave it to the girl and said, "Listen, Vasilisushka, remember and heed my last words. I'm dying, and together with my maternal blessing I leave you this doll. Always keep it with you and do not show it to anyone. If you get into trouble, ask its advice. When it has eaten, it will tell you how to get out of trouble." Then the mother kissed her child and died. After his wife's death, the merchant mourned as is proper, and then began to think of marrying again. He was a handsome man who had no difficulty in finding a bride, but he liked a certain widow best. As she was older and had 2 daughters of her own nearly the same age as Vasilisa, he thought that she was an experienced housewife and mother. So he married her, but discovered that he had been deceived, for she did not turn out to be a good mother for his Vasilisa. Vasilisa was the most beautiful girl in the village. Her stepmother and stepsisters were jealous of her beauty and tormented her with all kinds of work, hoping that she would grow thin from toil and tanned from exposure to the wind and sun. Thus she had a most miserable life. But Vasilisa bore all this without complaint and became lovelier and plumper with each passing day. Meanwhile, the stepmother and her daughters grew thin and ugly from spite, though they always sat with folded hands like ladies. How did all of this come about? Vasilisa was helped by her doll. Without its aid, the girl never could have managed all her chores. In return, Vasilisa sometimes did not eat, but kept the choicest morsels for her doll. At night, when everyone was asleep, she would lock herself in the little room in which she lived, and would give the doll a treat, saying, "Now, little doll, eat and listen to my troubles. I live in my father's house, but am deprived of all joy. My wicked stepmother is driving me from the white world. Tell me how I should live and what I should do." First the doll would eat, then would give her advice and comfort in her sadness. In the morning she would perform all the chores for Vasilisa. The girl then rested in the shade and picked flowers while the flower beds were weeded, the cabbage sprayed, the water brought in, and the stove fired. The doll even showed Vasilisa a herb that would protect her from sunburn. She led an easy life thanks to her doll. Several years passed. Vasilisa grew up and reached the marriage age. She was wooed by all the young men in the village, but no one would even look at the stepmother's daughters. The stepmother was more spiteful than ever, and her answer to all the young suitors was, "I will not give the youngest in marriage before the elder ones." And each time she sent a suitor away, she vented her anger on Vasilisa with cruel blows. There came a day when the merchant had to leave home for a long time on business. The stepmother moved to another house. Near that house was a thick forest, and in a glade of the forest there stood a hut. In the hut lived Baba Yaga. She never allowed anyone to come near her and ate human beings as if they were chickens. Having moved into the new house, the merchant's wife repeatedly sent the hated Vasilisa to the woods for one thing or another, but each time she returned home safe and sound. Her doll had showed her the way and kept her far from Baba Yaga's hut. Autumn came. The stepmother gave evening work to all 3 maidens. One had to make lace, the other had to knit stockings, and Vasilisa had to spin. The stepmother put out the lights all over the house, leaving only one candle in the room where the girls worked, and went to bed. The girls worked. The candle began to smoke. One of the stepsisters picked up the scissors to trim the wick, but instead, following her mother's order, she snuffed it out as though accidentally. "What shall we do now?" said the girls. "There is no light in the house and our tasks are not finished. Someone must run to Baba Yaga and get some light." "The pins on my lace give me light," said the one who was making lace. "I shall not go." "I shall not go either," said the one who was knitting stockings. "My knitting needles give me light." "Then you must go," both of them cried to their stepsister. "Go to Baba Yaga." And they pushed Vasilisa out of the room. Vasilisa went into her own little room, put the supper she had prepared before her doll, and said, "Now, little doll, eat and listen to my troubles. They are sending me to Baba Yaga for a light. Baba Yaga will eat me up." The doll ate the supper, and its eyes gleamed like 2 candles. "Don't be afraid, Vasilisashka," it said. "Go where you are sent, but keep me with you all the time. With me at your side, you will suffer no harm from Baba Yaga." Vasilisa got ready, put her doll in her pocket, and making the sign of the cross, went into the deep forest. She trembled as she walked. Suddenly, a horseman galloped past her. He himself was white. He was dressed in white. His horse was white, and his horse's trappings were white. Daybreak came to the woods. She walked on farther, and a second horseman galloped past her. He was red. He was dressed in red, and his horse was red. The sun began to rise. Vasilisa walked the whole night and whole day. Only on the following evening did she come to the glade where Baba Yaga's hut stood. The fence around the hut was made of human bones, and on the spikes were human skulls with staring eyes. The gate had human legs for gateposts, human hands for bolts, and a mouth with sharp teeth in place of a lock. Vasilisa was numb with horror and stood rooted to the spot. Suddenly, another horseman rode by. He was black. He was dressed all in black, and his horse was black. He galloped up to Baba Yaga's gate and vanished, as though the earth had swallowed him up. Night came. But the darkness did not last long. The eyes of all the skulls on the fence began to gleam, and the glade was as bright as day. Vasilisa shuddered with fear, but not knowing where to run, remained on the spot. Soon a terrible noise resounded through the woods. The trees crackled, the dry leaves rustled. From the woods, Baba Yaga drove out in a mortar, prodding it on with a pestle and sweeping her tracks with a broom. She rode up to the gate and, sniffing the air around her, cried, "Fie, fie! I smell a Russian smell. Who is here?" Vasilisa, trembling with fear, went up to the old witch, bowed low to her, and said, "It is I, grandmother. My stepsisters sent me to get some light." "Very well," said Baba Yaga. "I know them. But before I give you the light, you must live with me and work for me. If not, I will eat you up." Then she turned to the gate and cried, "Hey, my strong bolts, unlock. Open up my wide gate." The gate opened, and Baba Yaga drove in, whistling. Vasilisa followed her, and then everything closed again. Entering the room, Baba Yaga stretched herself out in her chair and said to Vasilisa, "Serve me what is in the oven. I am hungry." Vasilisa lit a torch from the skulls on the fence and began to serve Yaga the food from the stove. Enough food had been prepared for 10 people. She brought kvass, mead, beer, and wine from the cellar. The old witch ate and drank everything, leaving for Vasilisa only a little cabbage soup, a crust of bread, and a piece of pork. Then Baba Yaga got ready to go to bed and said, "Tomorrow after I go, see to it that you sweep the yard, clean the hut, cook the dinner, wash the linen, and go to the corn bin and sort out a bushel of wheat, and everything must be done, or I will eat you up." After giving these orders, Baba Yaga began to snore. Vasilisa set the remnants of the old witch's supper before her doll, wept bitter tears, and said, "Now, little doll, eat and listen to my troubles. Baba Yaga has given me hard tasks to do, and threatens to eat me up if I do not do them all. Help me." The doll answered, "Don't be afraid, Vasilisa the Beautiful. Eat your supper, say your prayers, and go to sleep. The morning is wiser than the evening. Very early next morning, after Baba Yaga had risen, Vasilisa awoke and looked out of the window. The eyes of the skulls were going out. Then the white horseman flashed by, and it was daybreak. Baba Yaga went out into the yard, whistled, and the mortar, pestle, and broom appeared before her. The red horseman flashed by, and the sun rose. Baba Yaga sat in the mortar, prodded it on with the pestle, and swept her tracks with the broom. Alone, Vasilisa looked about Baba Yaga's hut, was amazed at the abundance of everything, and stopped wondering which work she would do first. She beheld all the work was done. The doll was picking the last shreds of chaff from the wheat. "Ah, my saviour," said Vasilisa to her doll, "you have delivered me from death." "All you have to do," answered the doll, creeping into Vasilisa's pocket, "is to cook dinner. Cook it with the help of God, and then rest for your health's sake." When evening came, Vasilisa set the table and waited for Baba Yaga. Dusk began to fall. The black horseman flashed by the gate, and night came. Only the skull's eyes were shining. The trees crackled. The leaves rustled. Baba Yaga was coming. Vasilisa met her. "Is everything done?" asked Yaga. "Please see for yourself, grandmother," answered Vasilisa. Baba Yaga inspected everything, was annoyed that there was nothing she could complain about, and said, "Very well, then." Then she cried, "My faithful servants, my dear friends, grind my wheat." 3 pairs of hands appeared, took the wheat, and carried it out of sight. Baba Yaga ate her fill, got ready to go to sleep, and again gave her orders to Vasilisa. "Tomorrow do the same work you have done today. In addition, take the poppy seeds from the bin and pick off the dust speck by speck." Someone threw dust into the bins out of spite. Saying this, the old witch turned to the wall and began to snore. Vasilisa set about feeding her doll. The doll ate and spoke as she had spoken the day before. "Pray to God and go to sleep. The morning is wiser than the evening. Everything will be done, Vasilisashka." The next morning, Baba Yaga again left the yard in her mortar. Vasilisa and the doll soon had all the work done. The old witch came back, inspected everything, and cried, "My faithful servants, my dear friends, press the oil out of the poppy seeds." 3 pairs of hands appeared, took the poppy seeds, and carried them out of sight. Baba Yaga sat down to dine. She ate while Vasilisa stood silent. "Why don't you speak to me?" said Baba Yaga. "You stand there as if you were dumb." "I did not dare to speak," answered Vasilisa. "But if you'll allow me, I'd like to ask you something." "Ask, but not every question has a nice answer. If you know too much, you will soon grow old." "I want to ask you, grandmother, only about what I have seen. When I was on my way to you, a horseman on a white horse, all white himself and dressed in white, overtook me. Who is he?" "He is my bright day," answered Baba Yaga. "Then another horseman overtook me. He had a red horse, was red himself, and was dressed in red. Who is he?" "He is my red son," answered Baba Yaga. "And who is the black horseman whom I met at your very gate, grandmother?" "He is my dark night, and all of them are my faithful servants." Vasilisa remembered the 3 pairs of hands and kept silent. "Why don't you ask me more?" said Baba Yaga. "That's enough. You said yourself, grandmother, that if you know too much, you will soon grow old." "It is well," said Baba Yaga, "that you ask only about what you have seen outside my home. I do not like to have my dirty linen washed in public, and I eat gossips. Now, I will ask you something. How do you manage to do the work I give you?" "I am helped by the blessing of my mother," replied Vasilisa. "So that is what it is. Get out of here, blessed daughter. I need no blessed ones." She dragged Vasilisa out of the room and pushed her through the gate. Then she took a skull with burning eyes from the fence, stuck it on a stick, and gave it to the girl. "Here is your light for your stepsisters. Take it. That's what they sent you for." Vasilisa ran away by the light of the skull, which went out only at daybreak. By nightfall of the following day she reached her house. As she approached the gate, she was about to throw the skull away, thinking that surely they no longer needed a light in the house. But suddenly a hollow voice was heard from the skull. "Do not throw me away. Take me to your stepmother." She looked at her stepmother's house and, not seeing a light in even one window, decided to enter with the skull. For the first time she was received kindly. They told her that since she had left, they had had no fire in the house. They were unable to kindle a flame themselves, and whatever light they brought from the neighbours went out the moment it was brought into the house. "Perhaps your fire will last," said the stepmother. They brought the skull into the room. Its eyes stared so at the stepmother and her daughters that it burned them. They tried to hide, but wherever they went, the eyes followed them. By morning, they were all burned to ashes. Only Vasilisa was left untouched. In the morning, Vasilisa buried the skull in the ground, locked up the house, and went to town. She begged shelter from a childless old woman, and there she lived, waiting for her father's return. One day she said to the woman, "I am bored sitting without work, grandmother. Buy me some flax of the best kind. At least I shall spin." The old woman bought good flax, and Vasilisa set to work. Her work went as fast as lightning, and her threads were as even and thin as hair. She spun a great deal of yarn. It was time to start weaving it, but no comb fine enough for Vasilisa's yarn could be found, and no one would undertake to make one. Vasilisa asked her doll for help. The doll said, "Bring me an old comb, an old shuttle, and a horse's mane. I will make everything for you." Vasilisa got all that was required and went to bed. During the night, the doll made a loom. By the end of winter, the linen was woven. It was so fine that it could be passed through a needle like a thread. In the spring, the linen was bleached, and Vasilisa said to the old woman, "Grandmother, sell this linen and keep the money for yourself." The old woman stared at the linen and gasped, "No, my child, no one can wear such linen except the Tsar. I shall take it to the palace." The old woman went to the Tsar's palace and walked back and forth beneath the windows. The Tsar saw her and asked, "What do you want, old woman?" "Your Majesty," she answered, "I have brought rare merchandise. I do not want to show it to anyone but you." The Tsar ordered her to be brought before him. When he saw the linen, he was amazed. "What do you want for it?" asked the Tsar. "It has no price, Tsar, little father. I have brought it as a gift to you." The Tsar thanked her and sent her on her way, rewarded with gifts. The linen was to be made into shirts for the Tsar. It was cut, but nowhere could they find a seamstress who was willing to sew them. They searched for a long time. Finally, the Tsar summoned the old woman and said, "You knew how to spin and weave such linen. You must know how to sew shirts of it." "It was not I who spun and wove the linen, your Majesty," said the old woman. "This is the work of my adopted child, a maiden." "Then let her sew the shirts." The old woman returned home and told everything to Vasilisa. "I knew all the time," said Vasilisa to her, "that I would have to do this work." She locked herself in her room and began to work. She sewed without putting down her hands, and soon a dozen shirts were ready. The old woman took the shirts to the Tsar. Vasilisa washed herself, combed her hair, dressed, and sat at the window. She sat there waiting to see what would happen. She saw a servant of the Tsar entering the courtyard. He entered the room and said, "The Tsar wishes to see the needlewoman who made his shirts, and wishes to reward her with his own royal hands." Vasilisa appeared before the Tsar. When the Tsar saw Vasilisa the Beautiful, he fell madly in love with her. "No, my beauty," he said, "I will not separate from you. You shall be my wife." He took Vasilisa by her white hands, seated her by his side, and the wedding was celebrated at once. Soon Vasilisa's father returned, was overjoyed at her good fortune, and came to live with his daughter. Vasilisa took the old woman into her home too, and carried her doll in her pocket till the end of her life. This Russian tale was collected by Alexander Afanasyev in the mid-1800s. It is not the only Slavic tale in which Baba Yaga makes an appearance, and she chooses to either help or hinder those who come to her. She is one of my favourite fairy tale witches, and that is why I chose to share this tale with you first. And I can't wait to tell you more of them here on Witchways, Folklore and Fairy Tales.